Hola, buenas tardes. Favor de no hablar en este proyecto porque les daré el mismo respeto. Les voy a platicar acerca de mi ensayo. El realismo es mi proyecto en video. De la clase de historia del maestro Jaime. El proyecto se llama ¿Cómo impactó al mundo actual las creaciones de arte? Pasemos a la introducción. El arte realista se configura como un movimiento que intenta plasmar objetivamente la realidad. Se extiende a todos los campos de la creación humana, aunque tuvo una importancia especial en la literatura. En el caso concreto de las artes plásticas, el realismo consigue la máxima expresión en Francia, casi exactamente, en la mitad del siglo XIX. El nacimiento del realismo, ya desde épocas anteriores se apreciaba un cansancio de los valores románticos y el deseo, entre los artistas más inquietos, de incorporar las experiencias más directas y objetivas en sus obras. El proceso es gradual aunque rápido, y entre el romanticismo y el realismo se establece una continuidad, sin embargo sus planteamientos ideológicos y formales serán muy distintos. También se establece una relación compleja entre el realismo y el academicismo, debido a que todavía existe entre los dos una competencia evidente. También es cierto que se influyen mutuamente. Así, aunque los pintores realistas sean excluidos de las grandes muestras oficiales, la pintura académica evidenciará una atención mayor hacia la observación directa de la naturaleza y la realidad del momento. Desarrollo. Pintura realista de escenas. Muchos artistas de la antigüedad fueron tentados a realizar pintura realista con el propósito de reproducir en sus cuadros a personas y lugares. Son pocos los que alcanzaron la maestría en esta especialidad. Luego estas obras se utilizaban como recuerdo. La fotografía no existía ya que las primeras impresiones fueron logradas en 1816. Nobles, famosos y acaudalados pagaban sumas considerables a aquellos pintores capaces de replicar de buena forma a sus familiares y también a ellos mismos. La creación de pintura realista se mantiene vigente.
In 1871, the city of Paris was engulfed in bitter civil conflict. The revolutionaries of the Commune seized the French capital, and 10 weeks of bloodshed ensued. When the rebellion failed, the authorities needed a scapegoat. Their choice was a famous painter, a man well known for his radical politics. In September that year, Saint-Pélagie prison received a new inmate, Gustave Courbet, the founder of realism. When he began his 6-month sentence, Courbet was 52 years old. He had not been directly involved, but his links with the Commune had been strong. This was enough to convict an artist who was radical not only in his views, but also in his work. His paintings of French peasants had caused outrage. Never before had such humble subjects been painted in the manner of high art. But Courbet's genius defied the critics to secure the fame that he craved. This was a man who recognized the importance of image. In his early years in Paris, he devised a brilliant public persona. Because of the nature of French society at the time, he decided to present himself as a heavy-drinking, self-taught peasant. This was hardly the truth, but Courbet's self-marketing worked. Sadly, drinking was a feature of the artist's life. In his later years, the effects of alcohol and government persecution forced him into a sick and miserable exile. But in his 58 years, he created a body of works that stand as landmarks of 19th century art.
Courbet was really the first artist to boldly proclaim that art should be about the here and now. only genuine subject matter of art should be the artist's own experience.
Probably Courbet's greatest achievement was to emphasize that the painting of the everyday was important, and not just that it was an interesting subject, but that it was as important as any other kind of painting. And this is why he liked to do it on such a monumental scale.
He's also someone who I think sets up the idea of the artist as an individual, somebody who is very much of their own time, so that artists following on after him are able to progress is perhaps the wrong word, but develop and to create an art which is truly contemporary.
I think, to paraphrase one historian, he was like the bull in the china shop of academic art in the 19th century, and in a way he was a great celebrator of the material, the materiality of human and natural form, but also he was a great striver for independence of the artist. And I think that's really part of his achievement. He was a magnificent landscape painter, but he was also a confrontational, a political, and a strident portrayer of a material reality.
He revitalised the art of the period. It had become rather stuck in an argument between romanticists and classicists, and this sort of dispute that had gone on for so long rather failed to realise what art was really all about, and that in a sense it was something that should speak to the people of the time rather than simply portraying events from some classical historical past or some sort of literary ideology. So Courbet brought it back to where it really belonged, and in effect he gave art back to the people.
Gustave Courbet's eventful life began on June the 10th, 1819, in the eastern French town of Ornans. His father, Régis, had risen from the peasantry to become a prosperous landowner. In time, his son would exploit these lower-class origins for his own public image. But as a youth, he was more concerned with learning the business of art. The young man's career intentions were becoming clear, and in 1839, he moved to the hub of French artistic life, Paris. It was here that the first signs of Courbet's radical approach began to emerge. At the time, it was common practice for a young would-be artist to study at the École des Beaux-Arts before securing an apprenticeship with an established master. But Courbet chose not to do this. In later years, he claimed that he was an artist who had taught himself, but that was not strictly the case.
I think when you're thinking about Courbet and the extent to which he is self-taught, you have to really question the idea of what self-taught means. In technical terms, he was certainly trained, because at Besançon he attended the academy. He was a student of Flagelot, and of course when he goes to Paris in the autumn of 1839, he works for several months with Steuben and describes Steuben as his master. So in technical terms, he was very much a painter who knew what he was doing and who had the proper kind of skills training.
But I suppose what was perhaps different from Courbet and many other people is, you might say, he took control of his own education. He didn't go to the academy and go through all the hoops that students were made to go through then. He went to places where he could study from the model, he took advice from masters, but he was the person who was calling the shots. He was the person who was doing his own exploration.
Courbet was passionate about the old masters, and he spent hours copying their greatest works. We can detect the influence of the past in his earliest painting. Courbet himself said this image of man with a leather belt was inspired by the Spanish master Velázquez. But modern X-ray technology has revealed a different inspiration. We now know that this dark portrait was painted on top of a copy of a Louvre painting by an even greater old master, the 16th century Venetian artist Titian. The young Courbet also admired the painters of Northern Europe. In 1846, he travelled to Holland and Belgium to visit their art galleries. Courbet's genius was to take influences from the past and mould them with his own artistic spirit into great masterpieces.
Courbet was very interested in the art of the past, and when he went to Paris, he had the opportunity, through visiting the Louvre in particular, of seeing the works of many of the great masters. He was particularly interested in painters who we now see as part of a realist tradition, the Spanish painters of the 17th century, painters like Velázquez, for example, who, although he was the court painter, was also somebody painted with a tremendous frankness and directness and wonderful effects. And perhaps most of all, his interest was in Rembrandt, which might surprise us a little bit more, because Rembrandt isn't really very like Courbet to look at. But Courbet was fascinated by the way that Rembrandt, so to speak, suggested the painting of the everyday was interesting, it had problems about it, and that there was a tremendous mastery. He wasn't obeying any of the rules, he was just going directly for what he wanted to see, and that Courbet found greatly inspiring.
Artists like Rembrandt, for example, themselves were influenced by earlier artists like Caravaggio, and the sense of the way how paintings had a rather dramatic sense in the way that the lighting worked, and also the sense of the realism of the figures. All of these artists were people who portrayed reality as it was. So that Caravaggio's paintings still have a modern look today. And that sense was what Courbet instinctively reacted to.
When Courbet visited Holland, he was 27 years old and still far from established as an artist. He struggled to have his works accepted by the Salon, the annual Paris exhibition, that was still the only place to establish a reputation. One of his few paintings that was exhibited there was this image of a man with a black dog. Like many other early Courbet works, this is a self-portrait. The unknown artist's inability to pay for models may explain why he depicted himself so often in his early years. A sense of poverty and struggle can be seen in this self-portrait from 1845. Its title, The Desperate One, only adds to the viewer's impression of a young painter battling against obscurity and ignorance. Courbet suffered many salon rejections early in his career. By the time he was 29, he had submitted 25 paintings and 22 had been turned down. But life was not all grim. Having made his decision to be an artist, his father supported him with regular sums of money. This helped to pay for an excellent social life. Each year he returned to Ornans to enjoy the countryside of his birthplace. He painted his friends and family, including this delightful portrait of his favorite sister, Juliette. Courbet wasn't lonely in Paris either. He began an affair with a woman called Virginie Binet. In 1847, she bore him an illegitimate son, Désir, but the couple never married. Courbet also made many friends in Paris's cultural and intellectual community. These included Charles Baudelaire, a well-known poet who sat for this Courbet portrait around 1847. Baudelaire and Courbet were just two of a group of men who met regularly at a night spot called the Brasserie Anglaise. Others included the anarchist philosopher Pierre Proudhon and the writer Jules Champfleury. At the Brasserie, this group of friends discussed a new approach to the political, intellectual, and artistic issues of the day. In time, their meeting place would become known as the Temple of Realism.
The Brasserie Andler was very convenient for Courbet because it's practically next door to his studio.